myself.
I don't think Jillian's a committee member.
I am not formally.
Paula, 3 is a quorum.
3 is for this committee?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a 7-member committee.
It's a 7-member committee, but we amended the administrative code a few years ago to establish a quorum as 3. I will triple check myself on that, but I'm pretty sure.
Oh, so I guess our meeting last month was.
It was, and so we did go ahead and type up those as meetings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Shall have 5 regular members, 2 alternates, which makes the majority quorum 3.
Okay. All right, you guys are all set.
Thank you.
All right, that's good to know.
All right. Am I muted? No. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Housing Committee meeting. Thank you all for coming out in this fashion in our Zoom session for the start of the new year. Wishing everybody had a good holiday and back to business. So welcome, welcome, welcome. So I think we can go ahead just to introduce ourselves so everybody know who we are. I'm Hilda Hay, and I'm the chair of the Housing Committee Board. Go ahead, Paula. You can go ahead and introduce. We just go around and introduce ourselves.
Paula Schnepp, member of the Town Council and the current liaison to the Housing Committee.
Thank you, Paula.
My name is Gordon Starr, and I'm a town councilor.
Thank you, Gordon.
Megan Moore, Vice Chair, Housing Committee.
Welcome, Megan. Go ahead, Ivan.
Hi, Evan, Housing Committee.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out.
I'm Elizabeth Jenkins, Director of Planning and Development.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Welcome.
I'm Anna Brigham, Principal Planner for the Town of Barnstable.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, and welcome, everybody. Just looking at my agenda. So it's Wednesday, January 11, 2023, or 4 p.m. meeting, Housing Committee meeting. The Housing Committee meeting will be held by remote participation methods. Alternative public access to this meeting shall be provided in the following manner. Real-time access to the Housing Committee meeting is available utilizing the Zoom link or telephone number and meeting ID number provided below. Public comments can be addressed to the Housing Committee by utilizing the Zoom link or telephone number and meeting ID provided as Town of Barnstable -US-Zoom-US J84758323290, and the meeting ID number is 84758323290, and phone number is 888-475-4499. Interested parties may participate through the link or the telephone number provided above. This meeting is now called to order, and I'm just gonna ask, is there anybody recording this meeting? Could you please identify yourself? And if there's none recording going on, Housing Production Plan Project Update from J.M. Goldson presentation and Housing Production Plan Update. Was there anybody from J.M. Goldson here for this evening? So we do the update,
Yeah.
or we just gonna greet about ourselves?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Sure.
Hi.
Hi. Good evening. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to see you all again. So I'm Boris Mead with Jan Bolton, and tonight I'd really like to discuss the full draft of the housing production plan, which has been submitted to you all. That's really the bulk of the discussion tonight. So hopefully you've been forwarded a copy of that last week. And what I'd like to do is just share my screen with it and kind of go through section by section, but mainly focusing on goals and strategies. But if you'd like to talk about any of the sections, we certainly can. And just start to gather some initial comments from you all. But I know you might need more time than what you had to digest it all. So there is in the ideal world, we have a comment matrix that really helps us document everything. But if that doesn't work for you, we will take comments in any way that works for you. So that might be, writing an email, it might be marking it up in a Word version. And we'll be taking your comments ahead of time. But really, for me tonight, I would really like to know if there's any deal breakers, anything that definitely needs to be changed, because we would like to be able to present this to the planning board along with you all on February 13th. So that's the goal. So any changes to stay on track, with the schedule, any changes we would want to keep advised ahead of that date in order to get that to them. So let me just share my screen. Are you all seeing the document? Thumbs up. I see a thumbs up. Excellent. Thank you. So I pulled up the Word version on purpose because, well, I will just start tracking changes and making comments directly on here with anything I get. So we track it all sort of live as we go. And we'll just really take it step by step. I mean, it's a little tedious, but kind of it's important to make sure that we have any comments that you have. All right, so we have it acknowledged. So feel free to stop me at any time if you feel like I'm going too fast, or if you have something to add.
Laura, I have a kind of a basic question.
Sure.
That sort of underlines the whole report. What data are you actually going to have in the final report? What census data?
So we have here, we have the census data was taken from the 2020 American Community Survey data, which was the latest, and whatever full 2020 decennial census data we had at the time of the data collection in the summer of 2022. There's, this is the data sources page. So there's a lot of different data that we've incorporated into here. We've been in coordination also with the team doing the comprehensive master plan, Judy Barrett and her team, back and forth. And we did add in some additional data on homelessness and short-term rentals. And in the development pipeline section, you added in some on the subsidized housing inventory and so forth from the comments for the housing needs assessment. Does that help answer your question, or is there something?
I guess the question is there any 2010 data that's being used in this report?
It's all 2020,
okay.
Unless it's used as a basis of comparison.
Okay. So the ratio for our subsidized housing inventory is based on the most current data of number of physical units and households in the community.
So on that note, we have it's hard to make projections because we do not yet have the year-round housing numbers for housing unit data. So we have to go with what the state currently has. Those numbers aren't going to be updated until May. So yeah, the denominator number hasn't changed yet. It's still, that still is 2010 census data because that's what the state uses. So that's what we have to use too. We do have some, if you will, caveat language in there where we do sort of talk about things as a range, but it's difficult without that census data release to really know what that census number will be. For Barnstable, because you are still at 7.2%, other communities it matters, where they're right on the edge of 10%, they're quite concerned with where that bottom denominator is. For your overall housing production goals, I don't see that will change with the new number because you will still remain below 10%, probably somewhat similar in where you are now. So your numbers for getting certified, if that's you want to shoot for that, and so forth, those numbers shouldn't will be okay with what we have here, and nor we have to, the state will go off, but once they approve this plan, these are the numbers that the state will use for those certification and other goals want to shoot for.
So we will not have an opportunity to correct that percentage?
Well, you certainly, once it's released, yeah, you will know what those are, and you'll have those numbers.
But we actually should know, based on the American Community Survey, what is our total housing units that we have in Barnstable?
We have it, but we have an estimate. So let's see if we can get to that. Why don't we hold that thought, and we'll.
Okay, absolutely.
That. Yeah, when we get. Okay. But yes, I totally hear that concern, and we can talk more about that. Okay. This is just some introductory language.
On that, Laura, if I could, we did talk about the possibility for an executive summary up front, didn't we? And I think you said that is sort of part of our scope and something that we could include once we have a document that's a little bit more close to finalized, correct?
Correct. And so that's a goal, to have that more visual, graphic designed executive summary by the time that it's presented to the planning board. The only reason I'm holding off a little bit is I understand there could still be some, given there's some policy, I think some policy decisions still in flux. So if there's any changes to the goals and strategy narratives, I just want to, what gets pulled into the executive summary be as close to the final language as we can. We have the housing needs assessment data already kind of summarized in a graphic way sent to you. And so just be adding to that with the final goals and strategies. But yeah, that would be included. It could be included as a separate document or incorporated into the beginning of this final report, either way. Okay, so a brief summary of the community engagement here, the different focus groups that we held, the online survey, the workshops, and then some placeholders for adoption date for town council and planning board. A little bit more detail on focus group key findings, community forum, key findings, the second community forum, key findings, a brief overview of the community.
I had a question about the key findings.
Sure, for which section?
I missed the community forums because of work, unfortunately, but there's the short-term rental issue noted twice. We have some data that we went over in past meetings that, if I'm recalling correctly, said that short-term rentals consisted of either 6 or 9% of our available housing, whereas second homes were up to 30%. of the housing we have, is that going to be differentiated anywhere in this report?
Yes, that is there's some details on that in the what I would call the housing needs assessment section, where we're talking about the different housing types.
Okay.
In town, yes. Okay, so for now, there isn't any lovely illustrations in here now, but there's a simple list of the housing goals and housing strategies. This is just the executive summary. And this, for Elizabeth's comment, we'll have a graphic designer add some illustrations and things to have a prettier version of the executive summary that can break out or kind of here and here. This is just the summary information. So this is a little bit of a summary of the demographic profile and things that are all detailed out in much longer form later on in the document. Okay, and in your question, so the best available data we have shows second homes at being at least 33%, short-term rentals is at least 5%, and we have some details about our assumptions that were built into that, because of course short-term rentals, the amount of a short-term rental that you have at any given time in the community goes up and down. And your data, the database that you use, the proprietary database that you use to track short-term rentals, my understanding is you've had it for about a year, so we don't have very good longitudinal data to know if the amount of short-term rentals in the community has been increasing over time. We took a snapshot in time approach and looked at data from August of 2022. We eliminated any short-term rentals where there hadn't had any rentals in the past year. The database that the town uses does include rentals that are registered with the state or not registered with the state. It's sort of a global capture. At the time, there was 680 active short-term rentals, and that's really just 25% of the ones in the database. The entire database had posted tenants in the last year. And so there's and this, it's really there's more data, I think, that's needed to better understand that segment of the housing stock and its overall impact. But this will give you at least a little bit of a picture of what's been going on for the past year. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of breeze past this because I want to get into more into the meat of the document. And probably talk a little bit more goals and strategies, but like I said, we can get into more detail. Sounds like there's already some questions about the data. So I'll pause here and just see where you're at. Do you want to talk goals and strategies, or do you want to talk more into the housing needs assessment data chapters?
Laura, I just have another general question. At the meeting of the committee in December, there was quite a lot of back and forth with committee members and I'm sorry, your colleagues about what was in the strategies. I don't have a copy of the minutes from that last meeting, but were there any changes to the strategies as a result of that discussion, or are these pretty much the same ones that were reviewed last?
No, there were definitely. So mainly what happened in the last meeting was there was a feeling that there were too many strategies, that there was a concern and also that some of the strategies felt duplicative. So what we did in that meeting was try to eliminate any strategies that we felt like weren't adding a lot weren't really new, maybe were kind of ongoing or obvious, didn't really add a lot of substance to the plan. and consolidate some others. And then we did eliminate particular, a couple of them that were deemed to be, they're not as much bang for your buck or concerned about the cost. So for example, doing any kind of buy down program or a rental assistance program were eliminated at that meeting. Now,
Okay.
that said, this isn't final, right? Until it's submitted to DHCD and approved. So I fully expect there to be another round of changes before it even goes to the planning board.
Thank you.
Okay. But on the other hand, the goals really didn't change. So here's the production goal. Currently you have 7.23% of your overall year-round housing stock units. Well, and that's the 2010 numbers. And it's a note here that will change in 2023. Goes into a little bit about how that's calculated. Since 2010, you've gained 113 units on your SHI since that was last approved in 2018. And based on the 2020 census, you could obtain safe harbor for a period of 1 year with 3 new SHI units, 206 for 2 years with 206 new subsidized housing units. And let's see, with 1,000, which means basically there's a gap of about 570 total units to surpass the 10% goal. Acknowledging that denominator will change. We can also look at building permit data, which we have, and try, I could drill down into this a little bit more. But we know what has been permitted. We would have to, but we don't necessarily know what's been built, if that makes sense. It's what's been allowed to build, what has been built, the two things. But that is anyway. So that's the production goal. Is there any?
I just have a quick question for Elizabeth. Do you have confidence that is our current SHI number? We've lost a lot of accessory apartment units, and so I don't know if our current listing reflects both the gains and losses that we've had since the last count.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm confident. So I'm actually looking at, as we're doing this, what I believe to be our latest SHI. So I'm pretty confident that reflects what's on there. I do think that the SHI probably, and the maintenance of that does need some effort on our part. And I think it'd be good to, Jim and I were just talking, to have, the committee, maybe outside of this effort or as part of this effort, have a little bit of a better picture of what's on our SHI as well. But I guess long and short, maintenance of the SHI is a little bit burdensome, but we'll go back and take a look at these numbers based on what I'm seeing now and make sure that they're accurate and make sure that we have, especially with a gap in our housing coordinator position right now,
right,
as new developments come online, when they apply for building permits is, I believe, when we can apply to put them on the SHI. So as we have a lot of new projects coming online, we'll make sure that
So I just jumped ahead a little bit.
Oh, great, perfect.
The
Yeah.
latest we have, and we do have the full thing in the appendix as well, but the latest we have is from April 2022. That was what we were sent by the town.
Yep. And that matches the numbers on the document that I'm looking at now that Jim actually pulled this afternoon. So
great. So
we're all looking at the same data, which is good.
I think it is great. So we know we don't have to update this because we are working with the latest that we have. And I broke this out again. So this is just summarized, but what's rental, what's ownership, what's a mix of both, how that breaks down, what's in the pipeline. And I included the chart that Elizabeth sent me. This is from September 2022. So that's in there. And that's kind of in the section of the document on future development. So that's in, the way this is organized, goals and strategies come first, and then it kind of goes into the data in further chapters. You can see here, so section, housing goals and chapters, then we do demographic profile, housing conditions, development constraints, and implementation capacity. Okay, so, all right. All right, so as an overall goal, you have a production goal, and then you have the supporting the growing needs of seasonal year-round housing options for employees and more diverse housing options accessible to moderate families. Ensuring new development promotes smart growth and protection of natural resources. Assisting and stabilizing housing, especially for those at risk of homelessness, preserving your local capacity, promoting greater awareness, and that kind of concludes the overall high-level goals. There's a little bit of description that gets around them. And for strategies, you just always have a little section in here talking about what the requirements are. To get approval, and they're broken down into a few different categories. There's no specific order to these. All right, so the first strategy, considering regulations on short-term rentals to the extent they impact year-round affordable housing, is written more as a menu of options for the town to consider. Because there is, I think, a need to better understand the impact that short-term rentals are having in Barnstable. There's certainly, we've heard from the public, a lot of interest in having more regulations for short-term rentals, but without a clear picture of the short-term rental market right now, it's difficult to make specific recommendations. And of course, there's what would be politically feasible as well. And some analysis, I'm sure your finance department might have to do on ultimately what impact that would have to your town finances. So for example, if you did reallocate a portion of your transient occupancy rooms tax with the short-term rental income, I think there's a lot, maybe the entirety of that might go to the sewer expansion right now. So that would have to be understood, but is an option.
So Laura, just on this, I think that needs to be reframed a little bit. It's a little bit different in Barnstable, and actually, the way you're talking about it is regulating short-term rentals, but really, I think the description is talking about how short-term rentals are taxed locally. So I think it would be good if we could just sort of sit down and clarify some of that terminology and the sort of the specific way it works on the Cape and Islands.
Okay. This would be more all right. So another idea in here is adding a 3% community impact fee for professionally managed short-term rentals. You could also adopt a permanent residence requirement for short-term rental permit holders to prevent absentee landlords from converting long-term rental properties into short-term rentals. So that it's sort of presented as here's some ideas, here's some other, if you would like a little bit more detail, I can add in a few case studies in here. I felt it, given the community interest in this topic, it was important to include it as a strategy, but also felt like that both the data and what I've heard so far from focus groups and interviews and so forth doesn't point me in a clear strong direction for how to do this. But it is something I think that the town might consider in the next 5 years is some sort of additional strategy to incentivize. It helps to incentivize long year-round housing, but at the same time, as a tourist community, you have to balance both of those issues of economy and housing. Okay. Any comments on that strategy? All right, so pursuing a home rule petition to extend Barnstable's residential property tax exemption to Barnstable residents who are also property owners that provide year-round rental. You have the option to exempt up to 20% of the average total residential value in Barnstable every year to those who maintain their primary residence in Barnstable. That could extend, basically extending it to those who also primarily live in Barnstable, but they may have an investment property that they are renting. And if they are renting that property as a year-round rental, as opposed to a short-term or vacation rental, you could consider offering a residential property tax exemption in that case, or you can consider an even higher percentage of residential exemption to property owners who maintain their primary residence in the town. And both of those, one would require a home rule petition, the other would be just an increase in what you already offer, but both would need, to be analyzed and considered with your finance department to understand what that would do to your overall municipal budget to do that option, but it's a way to incentivize year-round housing.
Laura, I have a quick question, and I don't remember seeing it here, but something that this committee worked on was also the idea of policy around tax exemptions for accessory affordable apartments.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it here called out as a separate goal, so maybe we do some sort of combination around the way we approach taxation, local taxation, and affordable, and those who are promoting year-round housing. I just don't. I think it's something that has been a priority for this committee, and I don't want it to be overlooked.
Yeah, I think we do talk about that elsewhere.
Do we? Okay.
Yeah, I think I saw it elsewhere too, Elizabeth, but in some ways it might be good to put it together. So.
Okay, I made a little note here. All right, so here we have amending the zoning to incentivize the development and redevelopment of affordable assisted or independent living units for low-income seniors, such as expedited permitting, zoning relief, density bonuses. Just a little bit of a description of how it was amended previously, what sort of different incentives include, and supporting the village scale mixed use and multi-unit development consistent with the local comprehensive plan by implementing zoning amendments proposed within the downtown Miami Square incentive zone, and pedestrian-oriented village centers.
Just a note on this one, Laura, I think, there's been a lot of talk about 40R and now we have a new 40Y. Maybe just noting in here that those are additional zoning tools that are available to us that might help accomplish those goals. I think this is the right place for that, but it has come up a lot over time, and 40Y is new, and we're looking for the state to promulgate those regulations still, but it would be good to make sure that there's a note of using those tools in the future.
Sure. And in terms of locations, given that your comprehensive plan is still in the process of being updated, we look to the analysis that was done by the Housing Assistance Corporation, the so-called Grow Smart Cape Cod, as well as your previous housing production plan, and have a map here noting that some of the high priority locations for affordable year-round housing included Hyannis along Route 132, the Barnstable, Village Center, Centerville, and Osterville villages.
Yeah, let's talk about that, Laura. This is a great planning tool, but it's yet to be something we've really adopted as policy. So it'd be good to have that conversation. About whether we're sort of prepared to do that. I do also want to note, I heard public comment on sort of West Main Street as well as a place that we've seen a lot of support, and it's in our current local comprehensive plan for multifamily housing investment and reinvestment. So I think that should go in here as well.
Okay. I know that, yeah, some of the public feedback we had in our process here, a lot of the specific locations suggested, other than maybe the municipal properties, really weren't viable. And there is a requirement to discuss where, locations of where you would be prioritizing housing. So I definitely want to get some guidance on specifically where to say.
Great.
We do describe outside of Hyannis the sort of village districts that currently permit multi-use and multifamily here. And we do have a caveat that increasing allowable density does need to account for the water and wastewater infrastructure needs, of course. Let's see, anything else to say here? And you mentioned adopting design guidelines in each village to ensure new development complements the existing village character, as well as mentioning, of course, that any kind of mixed-use development should be supported with streetscape and pedestrian improvements that people can. All right. Anything else for there? So these, you'll notice the common theme of these. This is the bucket of zoning. So we get into other plans and capacity later here, but this is identifying zoning amendments and other strategies to support so-called missing middle and living little forms of housing, such as single-family home conversions, duplexes, cottage clusters, townhouses, and infill design consistent with the location identified as suitable in the local plan. So we define a little bit about what those two things are. We talk about cottage clusters, how different communities have handled that, a few communities for case studies, so you can kind of explore more about how other communities have done this. Tiny homes is definitely a new area for Massachusetts. There are the tiny home appendix Q allows you to locally allow for them, but currently Nantucket is the only community to explicitly have it in their zoning bylaw as a use.
There's a comment on that. In here it says that Appendix Q has been adopted. Ryan Bennett and I went back and forth with the building commissioner in Massachusetts as well. Right now, Appendix Q is on reserve. It's not actually in the 10th edition CMR. And this is something I've discussed with our legislators as well, wondering why it hasn't appeared yet. So right now, Appendix Q is actually not in place.
I will update that. But even when it is, there's still a second layer to that too.
Yes. Yeah, each municipality would have to adopt it.
Yes, and each one would have to kind of sit. So right now, there's some case studies. So Nantucket allows for tiny homes as the main house. So the only example in Massachusetts that I could find. Worcester allows for it as a, right, they have an example of a sort of a small, they call it a village, but it's really a mini subdivision essentially of tiny houses. They're using it as a way to combat homelessness. And I have links to these examples as case studies. Some of the other communities deal with them as detached ADUs, although I don't know that you would truly call them a tiny home as much as it would be less than 400 square feet. The Nantucket and Worcester for that model, these ones are more treated as detached accessory dwelling units. So they're really very small units, very small accessory homes, but they're part of a larger, they're related to a larger primary home. And are not as small as but they might be like 600 square feet or less than 900 square feet, but maybe more than 400 square feet. So they would probably meet the traditional, building the traditional. So I might want to break, I'm just thinking aloud, but I might want to even break out these case studies into kind of two separate categories. Townhouses, much less mysterious and more typical than tiny homes for Massachusetts. So definition there's case studies, single family conversions. That's typically done as a strategy to preserve larger historic properties that can no longer be maintained by a single owner, but they don't have to be limited to any particular time period. If the property's on septic, that can be a limiting factor. It needs to be expanded to accommodate increased load if there are more bedrooms being created, but some of them treat home conversion as accessory dwelling units. And there's some case studies here to explore. A description about infill development. We've definitely heard in the community feedback about the idea of using parking lots or locations that may have excessive amounts of parking as opportunities for infill, and two-family homes. So we list kind of where you currently allow for them, and so it's more of a gentle suggestion that you could amend the zoning bylaws to further allow duplexes in other areas with certain provisions on there. But we don't go into where or how you might do that because there isn't a clear direction yet, the policy-wise, I would say. So it's more of a gentle suggestion, again, as sort of a menu of ideas. Here we have strengthening the inclusionary zoning ordinance by requiring a higher percentage of affordable units at a variety of levels, including extremely low, very low workforce housing, and then similar incentives as we described before for different zoning incentives. Establishing an income fee that's comparable to the housing market. And we talk a little bit about where currently have incentives and so forth. But there's a need there for rental units that are affordable, especially to the deeper income levels and of course workforce housing levels as well. Right. So this is considering a zoning amendment to define what underutilized properties means in districts consistent with the local plan to allow redevelopment and use for multi-housing through expedited permitting zoning bonuses. Not many municipalities define what that is. There's a case study here for the report, and they define it. This is something that perhaps this is even a place to talk about 40R. But by defining underutilized properties, you could enact other permitting and zoning incentives for those properties. So once that's defined, then you could also even tap into other state resources. There's the underutilized property program, and that ties into strategy 9. And interestingly enough, the underutilized property program defines what properties are either. So I guess you have to define it yourself.
This is a really interesting strategy, Laura. Is Newburyport a good example of somewhere where you've seen this in effect?
Yeah, there was one, at least one community, Massachusetts community, that I found actually defined.
Okay. I thought it was really out of the box and not something I have seen before. So I appreciated something really innovative and yeah, I think it's a great idea and good to have. I guess my question was, is there a model? And if Newburyport,
yeah, and Newburyport was basically one of the only ones I could find with digging.
All right, great.
So, and then zoning for permanent. So this was a response to the feedback we heard that there's really a desire to have more specific strategies for unhoused individuals and those at risk of homelessness. So this is an idea for zoning for single room occupancies and what those are. And there's even models for enriched single room occupancies and kind of examples of what that is. We cite Salem as a case study. And it's similar in some ways to the concept of a tiny house village or micro units, but it's a little bit different. And then we do talk a little bit about the Worcester case study here too. That's that kind of tiny house village. And it's a partnership with their housing authority and resulting in studios that are permanent housing for people who are chronically unhoused. They're less than 500 square feet. They have a bedroom and a bathroom. They have a combination kitchen and living areas, and they have on-site housing who are there to provide some supportive services, the social services, those individuals. So there's one idea, one strategy at least, targeted specifically to that population. And that's kind of the bucket of zoning. And I'll pause there before we move into some more programmatic or local initiative strategies.
Is there any data on the missing middle income? I know that we're looking at AMI, and immediately under the missing middle, it mentioned incomes up to 120% of AMI. But is there any place or any graphic that may define what that missing middle income would be and compare it to housing costs?
Yeah, so down in, let's see if I can get there's a long document and there's a lot of this. If I in the demographics section, word search for it. development constraints. So ownership, affordability gaps, housing cost burdens. We define it through extremely low, very low, and low. But I could definitely expand that. I mean, it's just it jumped on me. For it. Where can people go? All right, here we go. This is a table that I could easily expand because it's and I certainly can format this to add in, you know, what exactly so here we talk a little bit what they define. That extremely low is below 30%, very low is 30 to 50, low is 50 to 80. But this is just you know, it's just a mathematical ratio. So there's no reason why we could expand this to define a workforce, either workforce housing or missing middle, something up to what 100% area median income is, and maybe 120% area median income is in a table like this. The reason we talk about these deeper incomes is because we're talking a little bit more about the housing cost burden and housing and so forth, and redefine it again. Moderate income is considered more of the 80% income level, and how much each are spending on housing costs, and the affordability gap, I think, is what you were talking about too. And again, this is the data here is from 2020, and the real estate market is a revolving thing. We do talk about more recent data. We even talk about that.
Yeah, I didn't want to hijack it. I just think that putting in the 80, 100, 120% is fairly important, especially given some of the conversations happening earlier in the draft.
Yeah, and some of these are, you know, official limits that are used for certain programs. But if the town is thinking about having a different sort of program, then that would have a broader range of income levels. Then, yeah, we certainly can talk about what those are.
Thank you.
Oh, right, not too far. Local initiatives. There we go. Okay, so local initiatives. This is, you know, not regulatory in nature, but more to do with how you allocate resources, time, funding, and property. So creating affordable year-round housing on vacant and underutilized land. It could be defining, you know, using the underutilized properties program, sort of what counts as, well, it's administered by mass development to help improve there's that word again, underutilized properties. We have a description of 171 Main Street in Hyannis as having received some funding from that program to build 11 year-round residential apartment building units in that building. A local case study of how that program is used. And then you can also negotiate increased number of affordable units in future privately developed projects, or create more deeply affordable units in those developments. And that's done as part of the permitting process and partnering with the housing trust and utilizing probably CPA funds to kind of cover gaps through loans or through their process that they use to allocate their funding to create more affordable units. So
Laura, this is Jillian. I had a question going back to 9 and relating to what Megan had mentioned about the missing middle. Would that be a place to talk a little bit about a strategy that isn't specifically affordable housing, but is more housing production? It's a little bit broader. I don't know. Just a thought.
That isn't specific. Sorry, say it one more time, Jillian.
So we were talking about local initiatives, and initiatives don't necessarily have to be targeted just to affordable housing, which would be that less than 80%. But the missing middle, which Megan had mentioned, and which we all recognize is the huge income gap, the affordability gap, as maybe a strategy that would be, I don't know, part of that local approach that's not necessarily going to meet the subsidized housing inventory, but a strategy.
Right. So you're asking for us to think of a strategy that could hit that demographic of those making between 80 and 120%, let's say.
Well, I guess I kind of switch it over to defer more to Elizabeth as to see if that would be an appropriate place to talk a little bit about strategies that are not, because it's a housing production plan, it's not just affordable housing, it's what might the town do to expand and produce housing.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe, Jillian, what you're referring to is we see a lot of communities that are seeking to redefine what affordable under the CPA Act is. I think maybe that's what Jillian's talking about.
That's exactly it. Thank you, Elizabeth.
I know there are a couple of communities that have in home rule petitions in maybe to define to redefine CPA eligibility up beyond 100. At this point, I think maybe we need to start locally with our notice of funding availability and what that says. But I think the idea of, emphasizing the need, being low at all ends of that affordability spectrum is important overall in the document.
Yeah, one of the issues is that these if it's federal money, it's 80% AMI. If it's CPA funding by law, it has to be 100% AMI or less. So unless they change the law thresholds, you can't use the money for people in those higher.
Yeah, so I think what some communities on the Cape are doing, just because the AMI, because this conversation changes a little bit since AMI has been redefined, in my opinion. But yeah, there have been some movement to be able to redefine what's eligible under CPA through through legislative means.
Yeah, that's all of that is good, because that's what I'm kind of driving at with some of my questions. Is there's a lot of capital A affordable emphasis here, which is fine because there's still a great need for it, but there's also a lot of resources on federal and state programs for affordable, whereas where you get to 100% or over, you still, on Cape at least, can't afford to live here, and those are a lot of the families we're seeing leave. So I think even if in this plan we can recognize that there's a gap there, and that we need to take some action on that. At minimum, I think that should be in it, just because part of my biggest issues is that missing middle, and a lot of this is the capital A affordable. So we're once again missing that gap in the overall kind of draft.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's probably being driven by the requirements of the HPP a little bit, Megan, but you know, there are programs like like I know the folks from Vail have been out here quite a bit talking about their deed restriction program, which I understand is a deed restriction based on residency, you know, not on income. So, you know, there are some, yeah, I think emerging models to think about just how to expand housing sort of intervention and housing policy into just folks who are living here year round versus the capital A affordable.
Right. And you're restricted with your fund. So unless there are legislative changes, you're restricted with how you use some of these fund sources like community development block grant funds or tax incentives or CPA and how they are used. But there's no reason why you couldn't also, I mean, in theory, use either philanthropic dollars or private or other town funds that aren't designated or regulated by these other laws to use for other programs. This is just a question of what are you using those for? How are they using? You know, there are other. I'm thinking of groups like the Mass Housing Partnership has, or Mass Housing has some programs for first-time home buyers as part of their, and sort of that's where you get into some of these like down payment assistance programs and rental assistance programs, but those are all are difficult at a town level, I think, to do, and the amount of families you're able to help with them are relatively small for the amount of funds you need to use. And I think that we had some strategies originally kind of talking about those, and those were removed because of those concerns. I think you're right.
Where did you hear those concerns, Laura?
That was at the last housing committee meeting.
Okay. Okay.
And also just, you know, internal discussions with our staff here, and I think we talked a little. I think we went back. It was back and forth on some of these where it was in, and then it was out, and then it was back in, and it was back out. So
yeah, I mean, because Jillian and I have been talking a lot about rental assistance programs.
Yeah,
so I think it'd be good to figure out, you know, what our policy at the trust is going to be, and what goes into this plan.
Yeah, it's tough, but I hear you. I hear that concern definitely. And right now, our strategies are for that group. I would say are around what you might call naturally affordable housing, which really means smaller units. Smaller units tend to cost less. And if you can find a smaller unit, cost a little less, and partner with a group like Mass Housing Partnership or something to get some a better deal on your mortgage or a subsidized mortgage,
yeah,
you might be able to squeak in. But it is tough. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think as long as there's a place in here that talks about the strategy of making our existing inventory more attainable and affordable. You know, it can't just be supply oriented. So I'm sure it's probably reflected in the collective, but as long as that comes through as that, I really do think our strategy needs to be two-tiered.
If I could, I was picking up on the piece that it's economic development, and I know that the town has been doing so many things towards, improved development, better development, and that maybe there was a way to leverage funds or to prioritize housing as a component of that. And I guess that's, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be affordable if it's part of a redevelopment plan, and you know that.
I have a question, Elizabeth. Is there any funds that, or do we have leftover funds, like for example, for the year 2022? And how is it being spent? Is there any programs that are like from the town or from the state that we have got grants or funding that has not yet been used?
Yeah, so I would say, the bulk of those funds fall within the balance of our Affordable Housing Growth and Development Trust Fund, which are CPA, which, that's part of our annual CPA allocation that each year, is meant to go to affordable and community housing. We still have a significant balance in that fund, and have had minimal success in spending that with supply-based projects, which is why we're having these conversations about about rental assistance and buy down. And we have ARPA money as well, American Rescue Plan Act money, that is potentially set aside for affordable housing projects as well.
So, does like the contractors around, are they aware of this kind of money is that it's available to them, or is there a way that we can come up with some strategies that instead of having money sitting and we're so desperate in housing, there has to be greater emphasis on housing, and how we have to come to a conclusion or some strategies, short term and long term, how we can get going. It's like I think we're just like, I feel like we're just sitting one place and we're just having meetings after meetings. I'm kind of like, I would like to have some action or see some action, something start coming across.
Yeah. We feel the same way, Hilda. We had a pretty extensive marketing plan that went together with the notice of funding availability that we put out at the trust. And we are finally starting to see some applications come through that. We just the trust funded the project at 850 Falmouth Road, and had some success there, but we agree that we're struggling to support supply through that program, and we're actively talking to developers to try to figure out how we can reform it to make it better. And so yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate the comment, and I think hopefully this plan helps us work through a lot of these challenges that we're having in terms of getting money spent, so we can figure out how to become more effective.
So my second question is, I've asked before and I've never really got the answer. Like, the town, can we make available all the town properties so we can see and people be able to make better suggestion, at least if we know where their location are, and we can start having conversations? Because I, for one, don't know where all these locations are, and I think the public should know.
Yeah, I mean, so we have the ones that are sort of actively in progress reflected here. Like we can map those. That's easy. We've spent a lot of time looking at town-owned property maps to pull these out as the most viable. But yeah, I understand and appreciate the question, because I do think there are sort of other opportunities that could be unlocked through partnership or other sort of coalition building. And yeah, we could talk about the best way to communicate that, but it's sort of the three here. Obviously with the Marston's Mills property being the one that's moving the most quickly, the town council voted to change the use of that property over to affordable housing at a town council meeting or two ago. So this has become we've become a lot more active on this strategy here in the last few months, and hope to keep that up.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, we could do a map, absolutely.
Yes, so here we have, Elizabeth mentioned this is exactly where we are in the good timing. We're talking about the conversion of available town properties to housing. Here we just listed the few that we knew were at the top of the list, and a little bit about the description of how you might develop those for affordable housing. And here, the next strategy is continuing the efforts to streamline those requests for housing, which I think you had just talked about. We did talk a little bit about the cost in there. NOFA, really, the notice of a funding availability request up above. And this is really just continuing the work we've already done. And anything you can do to sort of be streamlining permitting and streamlining how the those interested in getting local help with affordable housing projects and get access to those funding all just helps things happen more quickly. And here we have the strengthening the coordination, funding integration of the available social service foreclosure prevention and housing stabilization programs for low-income residents who are in danger of foreclosure or homelessness. So this is another strategy targeted at that population. And this is collaborating with your Human Services Committee, other groups, and some other information on kind of different programs that are available. This could be an opportunity for ARPA funds. We do list some of these like emergency rental assistance, housing programs, and so forth here as ideas. And this could also be related with your council on aging staff or others who are serve in that sort of human services area for the town as pointing people to resources that they can access. This strategy 14 is about establishing a rehabilitation program with community development block grant funds to help low-income homeowners preserve their existing housing, live independently, and fund repairs to homes for health and safety. And so this isn't for anyone of any particular age, although I would say it probably benefits, could benefit older adults more, but it's really anyone who need repairs or renovations to their home for health and safety reasons, or for, in case of an older adult, maybe it's the mobility restriction that in order for them to continue to live in place, they need some help for repairs. So there's some examples of, there are a variety of towns that offer this and have established home repair programs and home renovation programs using those federal funds and other local but not CPA sources. So it's a little bit of description about that and some case study there. And then otherwise, the trust, as I understand it, does already on a case-by-case basis defray some costs related to redevelopment or possibly even infrastructure connection. And just a note that would be expected to continue with some, maximum funding per project benchmarks. And then continuing your wastewater management, supporting those solutions. And if there's small scale on-site treatment plans, there's sewer expansion that you're already working on. And that can help with, especially these sort of small scale on-site treatment plants, if you had a model of a more a shared system, say for a cottage cluster or a tiny home subdivision type of model, or even for a slightly more dense multifamily unit. All right, any questions on those programmatic strategies or comments before we move into capacity? So capacity is continuing to educate the public on your local initiative program guideline. A little bit of a description on the vote to allow ADUs. And partnering with the neighboring communities to create a regional housing services office. This is a slightly new one, but this would help expand your resource capacity and support monitoring compliance of the portable unit. And it's not meant to replace your own internal local staff, but you could even serve as a community, for example, for if a group like this was formed and expand your staff, but then it would be serving Barnstable and some other communities. So there's a case study listed here.
This effort has gotten some traction locally, Laura. So just I think there has been movement towards a sort of a pilot RHSO through the county, funded through ARPA funds. So we should just make sure when we sort of balancing our draft versus what's happening. Let's just check in before we finalize this, so it reflects where we're at on this effort.
Okay, so it sounds like this is one that should stay as a strategy, but it's complex, so it might have to have a little bit of language refined.
No, I think we've all been hugely supportive of that idea, but we sort of shifted from, I think, willing to be out on front on it to willing to sort of work together with the county to support it and make it happen.
Okay, that sounds great.
Yeah, great.
So this collaboration strategy here is really related to the fact that you have a lot of groups, both in town and regionally, that are working toward housing and affordable housing. It's a real strength of Barnstable, but it can help to have a system in place where, especially when you have a new plan like this, it kind of be clarifying roles and responsibilities of the trust, boards, committees, staff, any other regional groups. And there's a model that Concord does, who also has numerous sort of groups similar to Barnstable, having numerous groups. And they have what they call a housing roundtable, and they meet quarterly just to touch base with each other essentially, and all the goings on related to housing, and make sure they're all kind of swimming in the same direction and align on different goals and priorities. So that is an idea there. We do have, and I'd love to get your feedback on it, but we have two tables after the goals and strategies. One is that shows how each goal and strategy relate to each other, so you can see which strategies support which goals, because some strategies support more than one goal, as well as an action plan to show that which strategy may happen in any given year, and who's sort of the lead responsible group. So that's definitely one to crazy check me on.
I had a comment on that. Is it possible to add that any kind of roundtable group should include people who are actively renting and actively unhoused?
That's an interesting idea. So normally a roundtable group is a mechanism to allow the internal, I guess, if you will, entities who are dealing with housing to coordinate with each other on strategy. But it's a good idea. I sort of like that idea that there might be maybe, if you will, a citizen at large position, or maybe there's something like that that's incorporated. So you have representatives from the community involved as well, or clear opportunities or engagement related to that group.
I would liken it to including parents on a student council, or a parent-student council, sorry. I think if we're talking about these housing issues and making policy surrounding them, there should at least be a couple people that are in that situation who are part of that discussion.
Yeah, and it's a point taken, and I'm wondering if you feel like that those groups aren't currently adequately represented on your own already on your other boards and committees in town.
Yeah, I do. As part of the committees that I'm a member of, I know that I think there might be one other person, but I think I am the only person who is renting on the local comprehensive planning committee. And as far as the housing committee, I don't think I'm the only renter, but I don't know if we have any unhoused people on any of these committees.
So what I would say is that to me is almost that's a slightly different idea than the Concord Housing Roundtable idea, but I think there could be a strategy maybe related to representation in general, you know, for housing committees to have making sure that the representation on, I mean, it's difficult because on the one hand, as you know, there are barriers, very real barriers to people who are in these positions trying to participate.
Yeah.
And it's time consuming, and that's one thing, you know, folks don't have a whole lot of, especially when they're trying to make ends. But it's still a worthy goal to have some sort of, you know, that voice heard and a part of the decision-making structure. So I'll make a note of it and see where we might fit that in. So representation of the, you know, graphics and income levels, and I'll say tenure, that's ownership, rental.
Laura, a comment. The Lower Cape Community Development Corporation, which is now the Community Development Partnership on the Lower Cape, has a roundtable, and they do this sort of, I think it's every quarter, they do meetings with representation. They don't specifically have representatives of people who are needing homes at the moment, but they do have representation from service providers who usually can give some pretty good input about case studies or things, you know, obviously anonymously, but information about current issues or cases.
Yeah, that's a good point too, that there, you know, there could be a way to get at the same idea through, you know, through a proxy of someone who works closely with the unhoused or people struggling with housing issues. So I'll have to think about that one a little bit. And sorry, Julian, could you just say the name of that group one more time? Oh. Was it the Lower Cape? Sorry. The
CDP, Community Development Partnership.
Yeah. All right, so here, and I'm wondering also, you know, maybe here is where they should be listed. So we have strengthening partnerships with housing advocacy groups. We have the Housing Assistance Corporation. We have the CHAPA, Citizens Housing Planning Association, municipal engagement initiatives, an idea, but perhaps that's also where this community development version of the
Laura, I should note that they are Lower Cape and Outer Cape currently is the population they serve, but or the towns that they serve. But I would think there's a capacity to expand a bit.
And this is building partnerships with local organizations, doing affirmative outreach to target populations, low income, seniors, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and then a couple of groups we referenced, such as Amplifying People of Color Cape Cod or No Places for Hate in Barnstable, really taking a concerted effort to provide outgoing research outreach to target populations to increase awareness of existing affordable housing programs and assistance at local state levels. This is things that I would say Barnstable already is doing for your affirmative, fair housing marketing plan would also be doing this. But if there's anything additional, or especially for any community engagement, or perhaps certain meetings, or maybe it's the roundtable meetings, some sort of outreach effort to these population to be able to attend those meetings, or participate in some way. Maybe it's not even attending the meeting if that's too difficult. Maybe it's the group going, maybe it's you going out to a meeting of the Amplified People of Color Cape Cod, for example. It can go both ways, or it could be an online mechanism, but it's just, speaking to the need for things like translation of languages, identifying the networks and nearby organizations serving these kind of different targeted groups. And faith-based organizations can often have some outreach and service programs and ideas of how to reach people in need, and advertising with other local and regional media newspapers. So Kidden Media, it lists ethnic newspapers, and the local hospital can distribute materials, and then other education institutions, so school social workers would have a knowledge of maybe families and who could benefit from affordable housing and so forth. So those are all good resources for spreading information among parents or among people who work, hospital and so forth to distribute. All right. And then, of course, sustaining your town staff to continue the coordination of the housing efforts and entities. And you've already demonstrated great ability to implement some local initiatives, but maintaining and increasing the local capacity is going to benefit the town to reach your housing goals. Okay. And then supporting the trust through funding, basically, CPA, ARPA. I mean, there's lots of programs listed here that are done short-term and year-to-year. But if you were to seek a state authorization for a real estate transfer fee or building permit surcharge, that can create an additional funding program administered to the trust and serve as a long-term and predictable source of funding for the trust. And there's a group called the Local Option for Housing Affordability that is considering this or another idea is exercising borrowing powers of the Community Preservation Act. If there were a key program that you wanted to implement was going to take a high level of funding needed. And so there's several Cape Town that are already kind of filing home rule petitions to establish a real estate transfer tax. And there's a little list of who's a part of the local coalition as well. And think more information. And then exploring some public-private partnerships with your large employers to jointly pursue the creation of workforce or seasonal housing. You might do that through providing a bridge loan. Like, I don't think the town is as interested in becoming a landlord itself, but that's one way to provide some short-term financing that could to facilitate that sort of development. If those entities were interested in creating it, I'm sure they probably see the need as well. So
I had a comment on that as well. As I know, Cape Cod Hospital and Cape Cod Community College are nonprofits, so they're not publicly traded, but we have larger stores that I believe may be publicly traded on the Cape. And if the option to provide a bridge loan is something that is pursued, is it possible to make it available to employers who do not engage in things like stock buybacks? Because I would not be interested in providing a bridge loan to companies that have the resources available but prefer to use them for something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I suspect that the town would have to evaluate. There's, I'm not going to list Home Depot or whatever on
Right.
here list. There's, giant, right. It's not your giant type of corporations. It's really thinking about your student population or your nurses and so forth, and those crucial essential workers that are key parts of your economy that you need to find housing for your economy to function. Is who you might want to provide this benefit to.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the matrix that I spoke of, where the strategies are listed down one column, the goals are across the other, and trying to flag which ones are kind of meeting which goals. You may disagree or feel differently to how I categorize these, and that's totally fine. And I will leave it to you to kind of read through and digest this later. And if you have any changes, for sure, let me know. And this is the action plan. So here it's just the strategies and then different fiscal years across, with the key responsible entity, kind of the lead responsible entity tagged here, and some supporting entities here. It's just assumed that town staff are going to be a part of this, so they aren't called out specifically. I list the key down here. So it's TC is town council, HC is housing committee, HT is housing trust, PB is planning board, CPC is the community preservation committee. But if there are some group that I've missed here, who's other than staff, like I said, sort of assume they're going to be involved in all this, let me know. Or if there's some error you feel like in the supporting entity that should be included, excluded, or responsible, and so forth, I really want feedback here. This is really my best guess at this, and how it works in Barnstable maybe different. So, and also likewise, if it's all the way across, there's a note here that means that it's an ongoing or should be implemented as opportunities arise rather than a specific schedule. So that's what that means. If it's like kind of across the board, you're going to be supporting the trust every year you're going to be doing wastewater management solutions every year, and so on. And then if you have any concerns or recommendations for where these should or could fall, I'm totally open to your expertise on what that should be. Otherwise, I just, to some extent, trying to make sure that there was some in the more logically in the beginning and more logically at the end. Okay, so, and here we're just really into the data, like we described before. So I think I'm just going to stop here because we've been going for an hour and a half. What I'd like to propose to do is let's take a quick look at the schedule, and we can talk through kind of what happens next and how to get your comments. I know this is the long document, it's a lot to digest. Let me just pull up the schedule. So we submitted this to you last week. We're I've marked up some comments today. If I can have any of your comments sent to me in the next week, that will enable me and give me enough time to incorporate those comments into a revised draft plan that can go out for public comment, kind of start a public comment period, if you will. And ultimately, the goal is to present that to the planning board as a part of that sort of public comment period on February 13th. And have the visual executive summary complete at that time and incorporated into the document. And have that public comment period then end on February 17th, incorporate any final revisions at that point, and submit it to the town council for a potential vote on March 2nd. They may need more time to discuss. They may want to vote ultimately at the next meeting, but the goal is to have this submitted to the Department of Development. So in the ideal world, it saves us a little time if you put your comments in the comment matrix that we provided. But if that doesn't work for you, totally respect that. And you can send comments to me directly. Let's see if I have the ability to chat. No, okay. I was going to drop my email in the chat, but that doesn't work.
Sorry, we disable chat.
Yeah, I get it. Those
Open meeting law reasons.
2 hours are the worst. But you can either send it to me directly. It's laura@janbolson.com. Or, you know, if you can also send it to Elizabeth and she can just forward it right to me. That works too. We will compile your comments either in comment matrix, marked up in an email, marked up in the Word version. It's all good, and I will need those in 1 week to be able to incorporate it into the draft that will go to the planning board. So unless I get a mayday signal from Elizabeth that says stop the presses, I'll assume that we're go for that. You know, incorporating the changes.
Yeah, I mean, I annotated a lot of comments as we were doing this. I would say back to the committee, you know, we will respond back to Laura with issues that are just sort of about how this is framed for our community, like the missing S in Marston's Mills, or the fact we have ordinances and not bylaws. Like, staff will do a really close read and take care of all those things. But I think what we'd love to hear back from the group are, what are the main priorities? We've gone through this a couple of times now. Is there anything missing in terms of actions that you'd like to see prioritized in the near future? I think from my perspective, that's what's most helpful. And then are we comfortable? We can regroup, but hopefully we feel comfortable with this document. So we're at a point in a couple of weeks here where we're ready to put this out for public comment.
All right. So at this point, I'll turn it back over to you. Carry on with whatever the other items on your agenda.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you for doing such a great job, and we'll continue to work together for the best of our communities. Is there any comments, suggestions from anyone? Are we all good with this section? If so, then I'm just going to move on to the approval of our minutes for May 4th, June 1st, and December 14th, 2022. Please. Okay. So that would be the on May 4th and June 1st. I know I was at both of these meetings, so I can move that the meeting be approved for May 4th and June 1st. So Donald, are you able to, or Megan, were you at any of these two meetings?
I think I may have missed the December 14th one, but I would have been, I believe, at the May and June ones.
Okay, so it would be me, you, and Donald. That would be at those three, I believe. I know I was there. I did look up.
I believe we elected you chair at one of those. Oh no, that might have been a little bit later.
There are a couple in between that are missing. We're working on closing them
Okay.
right now.
So I'll move that May 4th and June 1st meeting be approved.
I would second.
Thank you. And for December 14th, anybody else wanna move forward on that one?
I can second that one, right? I was there.
Thank you, Evan. That's good. All right. Our next community meeting date is February 13th, and this will be a joint meeting with the planning board at 7 p.m. Elizabeth, is this gonna be virtual or is this in person?
So we can certainly have that discussion, and Hilda, we might want to link you up with Stephen Robichaud of the planning board to have that discussion. I will say, if it's hosted at planning board, typically they hold their meetings via Zoom.
Okay.
And that's the format that they have been using to date.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, anybody else have anything that they would like to say, would like us to work on, otherwise from what's been discussed earlier? If not, I'll wait to see if anyone else have anything to say. Comments, suggestions?
I'd just like to thank everyone at the town and at JM Goldson for putting all that together. That was 53,000 words. That's quite a bit. So thank you.
Yes, I would agree with you on that. Lara has been doing a great job over there, she and her colleagues. So at this point in time, items not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance of this meeting. I'll move that this meeting be adjourned. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for coming out. We had a lot of information and we have a lot of homework to do. And we'll continue to work together as a team to the best of our ability. I thank you, the group thank you, our community thank you all, and we appreciate your presence. And I hope everybody have a good night.